I was a Coast Guard Lighthouse service officer assigned to Point Reyes Light Station in California in 1962.
Before we start, hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. Drop a like and comment where you're watching from. Let's get into it. My name is Thomas Brennan, and in 1962 I was a lighthouse service officer with the United States Coast Guard assigned to Point Reyes Light Station in California. I was 34 years old, 15 years in the service, and I thought I'd seen everything the ocean could throw at a man. I was wrong. Point Reyes sits on a narrow peninsula jutting into the Pacific about 30 miles north of San Francisco. The lighthouse itself is built into the cliff face, 294 steps down from the keeper's quarters at the top. It's one of the foggiest places on the entire west coast. Some years the foghorn runs more than 2,500 hours. That's over 100 days of continuous fog. The kind of place where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I was assigned to Point Reyes after the previous keeper, a man named Walter Hobbs, took early retirement. That's what the paperwork said anyway. Early retirement. But when I asked around, nobody could tell me where Hobbs had gone. He didn't transfer to another station. He didn't go back to his family in Maine. He just left one day and nobody heard from him again. The station chief who gave me my assignment was a man named Captain Morrison. Good officer, straight shooter. But when he handed me the transfer papers, he hesitated. "Brennan," he said, "Point Reyes is a difficult posting. Isolated. The fog plays tricks on your mind. If you start seeing things that don't make sense, don't trust your eyes. Trust your instruments. Trust your training. And whatever you do, keep the light running." I asked him what he meant by seeing things. He just shook his head. "Keep the light running," he repeated. "That's your only job. Keep the light running." I arrived at Point Reyes on March 3, 1962. The drive up the peninsula was beautiful in a stark way. Rolling hills, coastal scrub, the occasional glimpse of the ocean between ridges. But as I got closer to the station, the fog rolled in. By the time I reached the keeper's quarters, I could barely see the road in front of me. The quarters were a 2-story Victorian house sitting on the bluff above the lighthouse. Painted white, green trim, looked like it hadn't been updated since it was built in 1870. I pulled up to find my assistant keeper waiting on the porch. His name was Samuel Okonkwo, a young seaman from Oakland, maybe 22 years old. He'd been at Point Reyes for 6 months ever since Hobbs left. "You must be Brennan," he said. Didn't shake my hand, didn't smile, just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "That's right. You're Okonkwo?" "Sam," he said. "And I should tell you right now, I put in for a transfer 3 months ago. As soon as it comes through, I'm gone. That bad here?" He looked out at the fog. "It's not bad during the day. During the day, it's just boring. It's the nights you have to worry about." He helped me carry my bags inside and gave me a tour of the quarters. Kitchen, sitting room, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Everything was clean, but felt neglected, like someone had been going through the motions of living here without actually inhabiting the space. Hobbs left some things behind, Sam said, opening a closet. Personal effects, letters, photographs, and these. He pulled out a cardboard box. Inside were logbooks, dozens of them. Old leather-bound volumes with dates stamped on the spines going back to 1870. "Every keeper has to maintain a log," Sam explained. "Weather conditions, equipment status, ship sightings, anything unusual. These are all the logs from Point Reyes since the light was first lit." I picked one up at random. 1923. The handwriting was cramped, faded, but legible. Routine entries mostly. Fog duration, visibility measurements, fuel consumption. But then I noticed something. Several pages had been torn out. Clean cuts, like someone had used a razor. "What happened here?" I asked. Sam shrugged. "They're all like that. Every logbook has pages missing. I asked Hobbs about it once. He told me some things aren't meant to be recorded. That didn't sit right with me. The whole point of a logbook is to record everything. But I let it go. Figured I'd have time to investigate later. That first night I made my rounds, climbed down the 294 steps to the lighthouse, checked the lens and the lamp, verified the fog signal was operational. The fog was thick, visibility maybe 50 feet. The horn blasted every 30 seconds, a deep, mournful sound that vibrated in your chest. Standing on the gallery outside the lantern room, I looked down at the rocks below. Even through the fog, I could see the white foam of waves crashing against the cliff. Violent water, dangerous coast. I understood why they'd built a lighthouse here. Back in the quarters, I started my first logbook entry. March 3rd, 1962. Arrived at station. Fog heavy, visibility 50 feet. All equipment operational. Conducted first inspection of light and fog signal. No issues to report. I was about to close the book when Sam appeared in the doorway. "You'll want to add something to that," he said. "Like what? Like the fact that you didn't see anything tonight. Make a note of it. Every night you don't see them, write it down. See who." He just looked at me. Then he went upstairs to bed. I sat there for a long moment, pen in hand. Then I added one more line. No unusual sightings. I didn't know why I wrote it, but something told me I should. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Routine keeper duties. Maintaining the light, monitoring the fog signal, keeping the quarters in order. Sam barely spoke to me. He did his shifts, ate his meals in silence, and spent most of his free time reading or staring out the window at the fog. I used the time to go through the old logbooks, read them cover to cover, every volume from 1870 to 1961. Most of it was mundane. Weather reports, maintenance logs, supply inventories. But scattered throughout, I found entries that didn't fit. April 12, 1887. Sighted vessel on rocks below station. 3-masted clipper ship appeared to be grounded. Sent signal but received no response. Visibility improved by morning. No vessel present, no wreckage. No record of any ship lost in this area on this date. November 3rd, 1901. Fog heavy. Observed lights on water approximately 200 yards offshore. Lights appeared to be from steam vessel. Lights remained stationary for 6 hours. At dawn, lights gone. No vessel visible. Harbor master confirms no ships in area. August 22nd, 1934. Third night of continuous fog. At 0300 observed what appeared to be passenger liner on rocks directly below light. Ship showed no damage, no list. Figures visible on deck. Hundreds of them. All facing the lighthouse. All looking up. Could not make out faces. At 0415, fog thickened, ship no longer visible. At dawn, rocks empty. No evidence of any vessel. There were dozens of entries like this. Different keepers, different decades, but all describing the same thing. Ships appearing on the rocks below the lighthouse during foggy nights. Ships that showed no distress. Ships with crews that just stood on deck and watched the light. Ships that vanished by morning, leaving no trace. And then I noticed the pattern. Every entry describing a ship's sighting had been made during heavy fog. Every entry had been made between midnight and dawn, and every entry had been followed by torn-out pages. Whatever the keepers had written after seeing the ships, someone had removed it. I brought my findings to Sam. Showed him the logbooks, pointed out the pattern. He listened without expression. "You're not surprised," I said. "I've seen them," he replied. "That's why I put in for a transfer. You've seen the ships?" "Once, 3 months ago. Fog came in around midnight, thickest I'd ever seen. I was doing my rounds, checking the light. I looked down at the rocks, and there it was. Old ship, wooden hull, 3 masts. Looked like something from a painting. Just sitting there on the rocks like it had run aground. But there was no damage. No broken timbers, no torn sails. Perfect condition. What did you do?" "I watched it. For maybe an hour. There were people on deck. Couldn't see their faces. Fog was too thick. But I could see them moving, walking back and forth. And every few minutes they'd all stop and look up, at the lighthouse, at me. Then what? Then the fog got thicker and I couldn't see it anymore. By morning, it was gone. No wreckage, no debris, nothing. Like it was never there. Did you report it?" He laughed bitterly. "To who? So they can tell me I imagined it? So they can write me up for mental instability and end my career? No, I kept my mouth shut. But I started asking around. Talked to some old-timers who'd served here back in the 40s. They knew about the ships. Told me everyone who serves at Point Reyes sees them eventually. And everyone keeps quiet about it. Why? Because talking about it makes it worse. That's what they said. The more attention you pay to the ships, the more often they appear. And the more often they appear, the closer they get. I didn't know what to do with that information. My training told me to report everything, document everything, maintain accurate records. But my instincts told me something else. Something was wrong at Point Reyes. Had been wrong for almost 100 years. And whatever it was, nobody wanted it on paper. That night, the fog rolled in thick. I was in the lantern room, checking the rotation mechanism on the lens when I looked out the window toward the rocks below, and I saw my first ship. It was a clipper. Beautiful 3-masted vessel, the kind they used for the China tea trade back in the 1850s. It sat on the rocks directly below the lighthouse, perfectly upright, sails furled, like it had been placed there by a careful hand. No damage, no list, no waves breaking over its deck, even though the water was rough enough to throw spray 30 feet in the air. I grabbed the binoculars and focused on the deck. There were people there, dozens of them. Men and women in old-fashioned clothing, standing at the rails, all looking up at the lighthouse. At me. I couldn't see their faces clearly through the fog, but I could see their posture. Patient, expectant, like they were waiting for something. The light swept past them, beam cutting through the fog, and in that moment of illumination I saw more detail. The men wore peacoats and caps. The women wore long dresses with bonnets. They looked like passengers from 100 years ago, and they were all completely still. No movement, no gestures, no conversation, just standing there, watching. I lowered the binoculars. My hands were shaking. The light is supposed to warn ships away from dangerous water. That's its purpose. That's why we keep it burning, why we maintain the fog signal, why we sit in this isolated station month after month. To save lives, to prevent wrecks. But looking at that ship on the rocks, I had a terrible thought. What if the light wasn't warning them away? What if it was calling them in? I watched for another hour. The ship didn't move. The people didn't move. They just stood there, looking up at the light, waiting. Then the fog thickened, and I couldn't see them anymore. At dawn, I climbed down the 294 steps and walked out onto the rocks. Dangerous footing, slippery with spray, but I had to know. There was nothing there. No ship, no wreckage. No sign that anything had ever been on those rocks except seawater and barnacles. I went back to the quarters and opened my logbook. Wrote down everything I'd seen. The clipper ship, the passengers, the way they'd watched the light. I wrote it all, every detail, because that's what a proper log requires. Then I sat there, looking at what I'd written. The torn pages in the old logbooks, the missing records, the keepers who'd seen the ships and then removed their own entries. Maybe they'd removed them because they were afraid of being thought crazy. Or maybe they'd removed them because they'd learned what happened if you left them in. I didn't tear out the pages, but I didn't add anything more either. Some things aren't meant to be recorded. That's what Hobbs had told Sam. I was starting to understand what he meant. Over the next month, I saw the ships 4 more times. Always during heavy fog, always between midnight and dawn. Always the same behavior. They'd appear on the rocks below the lighthouse, perfectly intact. Crews standing on deck looking up at the light. And by morning, they'd be gone, but they weren't always the same ships. The second sighting was a steamship, sidewheel paddle steamer, the kind they used in the 1860s and 1870s. Black hull, single smokestack, maybe 200 feet long. It sat on the rocks like a toy placed by a child. No damage, no indication of how it got there. The crew stood at the rails in Victorian-era clothing, men in bowler hats and long coats, women with parasols. All of them looking up at the lighthouse. The third sighting was a warship. Early destroyer, the kind they built around World War I. Gray hull, 2 smokestacks, gun turrets fore and aft. The crew was in naval uniforms, whites and blues, standing in formation on the deck. Officers on the bridge. Enlisted men in rows along the rails, all facing the light. The fourth was a fishing trawler, small vessel, maybe 60 feet, with nets still hanging from the booms. The crew was just 5 men in oilskins and rubber boots, standing together at the stern. They were the closest I'd seen, near enough that I could almost make out their faces through the fog. Almost. The fifth sighting was the Clipper again. Same ship I'd seen my first night. Same position on the rocks, same passengers standing at the rails in their old-fashioned clothes, like it had never left. After each sighting, I documented everything in my logbook. The type of vessel, the approximate number of crew, the duration of the appearance. I drew diagrams showing the position of each ship relative to the lighthouse. I noted the weather conditions, the fog density, the time the ship appeared and disappeared. Sam watched me do this with growing unease. "You're making a mistake," he said one morning after I'd spent an hour recording details from the previous night's sighting. The old keepers tore those pages out for a reason. "What reason?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know exactly, but I know that Hobbs kept detailed records too when he first got here. Wrote down everything he saw, just like you're doing, and the more he wrote, the more he saw. The ships started appearing every foggy night. Then every night, fog or not. And they started getting closer. Closer to what? To the lighthouse. To him. By the end, he told me he could see their faces. He could hear them talking. Talking about what? Sam looked at me. About how to get inside. I didn't tear out my pages, but I did start paying more attention to the logbooks from previous keepers. Not just the entries about ship sightings. Everything. The routine daily logs, the maintenance records, the personal observations. And I found something. Every keeper who documented the ships extensively had eventually stopped writing altogether. Not just about the ships. About everything. Their logs would go from detailed daily entries to sparse weekly notes to nothing at all. And shortly after the logs stopped, the keeper would leave. Early retirement, medical discharge, transfer to another station. One way or another, they'd be gone. Hobbs had been a prolific record keeper. 3 logbooks full of detailed observations during his 2 years at Point Reyes. Then, 6 months before he left, the entries stopped. His last recorded observation was dated September 1961. After that, blank pages. What had he seen that made him stop writing? I found the answer in his personal effects. Sam had boxed them up but never sent them anywhere. Tucked inside an old Bible, I found a letter. Handwritten, dated October 1961, addressed to Hobbs's sister in Maine. Never sent. Dear Margaret, I know it's been months since I wrote. I apologize for my silence. There are things happening here that I can't explain, and I didn't want to worry you. But I need to tell someone. I need someone to know, in case something happens to me. There are ships in the water. Ghost ships, I suppose you'd call them, though they look solid enough. They appear on foggy nights, sitting on the rocks below the lighthouse. Different ships from different times. Clippers, steamers, destroyers, all with crews, all watching the light. I made the mistake of documenting them, writing down every detail, trying to understand the pattern. And the more I documented, the more frequently they appeared. Soon, I was seeing them every night, and they were getting closer. Last week, one of them wasn't on the rocks anymore. It was in the water, floating just offshore. Close enough that I could see the crew clearly. They weren't like us, Margaret. Their faces were wrong, empty, like masks with nothing behind them, and they were calling out to me. I couldn't hear actual words, but I could hear the sound. A kind of whispering that got inside my head. They want me to come down. They want me to join them. They say that's what the light is for. It's not warning ships away. It's calling them in, calling us in. It's a signal, Margaret, a beacon for the dead. I've stopped keeping the log. I've stopped looking at them when they appear. I'm hoping that if I ignore them, they'll go away. But every night they get a little closer. Every night the whispering gets a little louder. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I don't know how much longer I can resist. Pray for me. Your brother, Walter. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it back in the Bible and sat there in the dark, listening to the foghorn blast every 30 seconds. A beacon for the dead. What did that mean? Who were the people on those ships? Were they ghosts of actual crews, sailors who'd died along this coast over the past century? Or were they something else? Something that used the shapes of ships and the figures of people but wasn't really either. I didn't know, but I knew one thing. Hobbs had documented the ships and they'd gotten closer. They'd started calling to him. And then he'd left, just walked away, and was never heard from again. I looked at my logbook. All those detailed entries, all those observations and diagrams and notes. Maybe Sam was right. Maybe documenting them was a mistake. But I was a Coast Guard officer. I'd been trained to keep records, to observe and report, to maintain accurate logs. It went against everything in me to leave pages blank. So I kept writing. But I stopped going to the gallery during foggy nights. I stopped looking down at the rocks. I did my job, maintained the light, and tried to ignore what was appearing below. It didn't work. Even without looking, I knew they were there. I could feel them. A pressure in the air, a weight on my mind. And at night, lying in my bunk, I could hear something. Not the foghorn, not the waves. Something else. A whispering just below the threshold of comprehension. Like voices in another room, talking about you, but not quite loud enough to understand. Sam's transfer came through in late April. He was reassigned to a station in Oregon. When I drove him to the ferry, he looked relieved and guilty at the same time. "I'm sorry to leave you alone out here," he said. "But I can't stay, you understand?" "I understand." He hesitated. "You should request a transfer too, before it gets worse." "I'll be fine." He looked at me like he knew I was lying. Hobbs said the same thing. Then he was gone, and nobody knows where. I watched the ferry pull away, Sam standing at the rail, growing smaller and smaller until the fog swallowed him. Then I drove back to Point Reyes. I was alone. My replacement assistant was supposed to arrive in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of solitary duty at an isolated lighthouse where ghost ships appeared in the fog and whispered to you in the dark. I could do it. I was a professional. I'd weathered worse than this. The first night alone, I saw 6 ships. They filled the water below the lighthouse, clustered together like a fleet at anchor. Clippers and steamers and fishing boats, all different sizes, all different eras. Hundreds of figures standing on decks, all looking up. And they were closer than ever. The nearest ship was maybe 100 yards offshore. Close enough that when the light swept past, I could see details I'd never seen before. The grain of the wood planks, the rust on the metal hulls, the expressions on the faces of the crew. They were smiling. I backed away from the window, went to the quarters, locked the door, didn't come out until dawn. In the morning, the water was empty, just waves and rocks and the endless gray Pacific. I went to my logbook, started to write an entry, then stopped. My hand was shaking. I couldn't make myself form the words. Instead, I wrote something else. April 28th, 1962. Clear skies, normal operations, no unusual sightings. It was a lie. The first lie I'd ever written in an official record. But I told myself it was necessary. Documenting them made them stronger, made them closer. If I stopped writing about them, maybe they'd go back to the way they were before. That night, the fog came in again. I stayed in the quarters, kept the curtains closed, tried to sleep. But the whispering was louder now, clearer, and I could almost make out words. Come down, join us. The light is for you. I pressed my hands over my ears. Didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was in my head. For the next week, I didn't look at the water. Didn't go to the gallery unless absolutely necessary. Kept my eyes on my instruments, my routines, anything but the rocks below. But they were there. Every night they were there. I could feel them, and they were getting closer. On May 5th, I broke. I had to know, had to see how bad it had gotten. I went to the lantern room, looked down. The nearest ship was 20 yards offshore. A 3-masted schooner, close enough that I could read the name on the bow. The Esperanza. It had been a real ship. I'd seen it in the Maritime records. Lost with all hands in 1891, somewhere along the California coast. But there it was, looking newer than it had the day it was launched. And the crew was on deck, looking up at me. I could see their faces now, really see them. Sam was right, they were wrong. The features were there, eyes and nose and mouth, but they didn't fit together right. Like a painting by someone who'd heard faces described but never actually seen one. And the eyes were the worst, dark and empty and hungry. The nearest figure, a man in a captain's uniform, raised his arm and pointed at me. Then he pointed down, at the water, at the ship. Come down, the whisper said, clear as words now. Join us. The light is for you. It's been calling you all along. I stumbled back from the window, ran up the stairs to the quarters, locked myself in my room. The whispering didn't stop. I'm trained to handle stress, to maintain composure in dangerous situations. But this wasn't stress. This was something breaking, something fundamental coming apart. I looked at my logbook, all those blank pages, all those lies, and I made a decision. If documenting them made them stronger, then I was done documenting. But I wasn't done investigating. Somewhere in this lighthouse, in these records, there had to be answers. There had to be an explanation for what these things were and what they wanted, and why the light was really here. I started searching. I went through every file, every record, every scrap of paper I could find. Old construction documents, maintenance logs, correspondence between keepers and the lighthouse board. Most of it was routine, but in a storage closet I'd never opened, I found a box marked Historical Records, Do Not Remove. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Letters dating back to the 1860s, records from before the lighthouse was built, and a report that changed everything I thought I knew about Point Reyes. It was dated 1854, 8 years before construction started. Written by a surveyor from the U.S. Coast Survey, recommending locations for a new Pacific lighthouse. He'd identified Point Reyes as the optimal site for one reason. The ships were already there. The local fishermen call them ghost lights, the surveyor wrote. Vessels that appear in the fog at night, sitting on the rocks as if wrecked but showing no damage. They've been appearing for as long as anyone can remember. The Miwok people who lived here before the Spanish arrived have legends about them. They say the lights are a gateway, a passage between the world of the living and somewhere else. I recommend we build the lighthouse at this location. If the lights are a natural phenomenon, the beacon will help ships avoid them. And if they are something more, perhaps the beacon will help us understand what. I put down the report, read it again. The lighthouse wasn't built to warn ships away from the ghosts. It was built to study them, and we'd been feeding them light for 100 years. The more I dug into the historical records, the worse it got. The lighthouse had been built to study the ghost ships, but over the years that purpose had been buried, forgotten by some, hidden by others. The official records showed a standard navigational aid. The unofficial records, the ones I found in that storage closet, told a different story. There were letters from the first keeper, a man named Jonathan Marsh, to the Lighthouse Board in Washington. In the early years, he'd provided detailed reports on the ship's sightings, descriptions, sketches, theories about what they might be. The board had encouraged this, sent instructions on how to document the phenomena, requested regular updates. Then, in 1878, something changed. Marsh's letters became increasingly disturbed. The ships were appearing more frequently, he wrote. They were getting closer. The crews were trying to communicate. And worst of all, the light seemed to be calling them. I have come to a terrible conclusion, he wrote in his last letter. The lens we use to focus the beam, the Fresnel lens imported from France, it is not merely directing light. It is transmitting something, a signal, a message. Every time the beam sweeps past the ships, they respond. They move closer. They become more solid, more real. I believe we have made a grave error. We thought we were studying the phenomena. Instead, we have been feeding it. The light is not warning ships away from danger. The light is the danger. It is a beacon, but not for the living. It is calling out to something on the other side, and that something is answering. I recommend we extinguish the light immediately and dismantle the lens. Whatever is out there in the fog, we must stop calling it. That was his last recorded communication. The next entry in the logbook was from a new keeper. Jonathan Marsh had been reassigned due to mental strain. That's what the official record said. But I found an internal memo from the Lighthouse Board. Marsh hadn't been reassigned. He'd been found at the base of the cliff, on the rocks where the ships appeared. His body showed no signs of injury consistent with a fall. He was simply dead. And he was smiling. The board covered it up, called it an accident. But in the memo there was a handwritten note in the margin. He went down to them, just like they wanted. God help us, the lens works. The lens works. I thought about that phrase as I climbed down the 294 steps to the lantern room. The lens works. What did that mean? The Fresnel lens was a marvel of engineering, a system of prisms and glass that could focus a flame into a beam visible for miles. It was optical science, physics. There was nothing supernatural about it. But as I stood in front of the lens, watching the lamp turn behind it, I felt something I'd never felt before. A vibration. Not in my body, but in my mind. Like the lens was resonating at a frequency just below human perception. And I realized I could hear the whispering more clearly here. Right next to the lens, the voices were almost distinct. Not English. Not any language I recognized. But organized, structured, like a transmission being broadcast. The light is not warning ships away from danger. The light is the danger. I made a decision. I was going to turn off the light. It went against everything in my training, everything in my oath as a Coast Guard officer. The light was safety. The light was duty. You kept the light burning no matter what. But the light wasn't saving anyone. It was calling something, feeding something. And whatever that something was, it was getting closer every night. I reached for the lamp. "Don't," the voice came from behind me. Clear, audible, not whispered. I turned around. There was a man standing in the lantern room. He wore a keeper's uniform, but old. Turn-of-the-century style. His face was weathered, tired, and his eyes were dark. "You can't stop it," he said. "The light isn't the source. The light is just the amplifier. What's out there has always been here. The rocks, the water, this whole peninsula. It's a thin place. The light just makes it easier for them to come through. Who are you?" "My name is Jonathan Marsh. I was the first keeper. You died in 1878. He nodded. "I went down to the ships. I thought if I joined them, I could understand them. Find out what they wanted. Maybe find a way to stop them. What do they want? The same thing everything wants. To exist. To continue. They were alive once, a long time ago. Not human, not exactly, but alive. Conscious. When they died, they got stuck. Caught between what they were and what comes next. The light gives them form. Purpose. It lets them pretend they're still real. But they're not real. No. They're echoes. Memories. But memories that want to be more, and the only way they can become more is by adding to their number. Every person who goes down to the ships becomes part of them. Another echo, another memory trapped in the fog. How do I stop them? His expression was sad. You don't. You can turn off the light and they'll fade. Become less distinct, but they won't go away. They'll just wait for the next keeper to turn it back on. And eventually, someone always does. There has to be a way. There is one way. He looked at me with those dark eyes. You can join them. Become one of them. Once you're part of the collective, you'll understand what they are. Maybe you'll find a way to set them free. Or maybe you'll just become another echo. Either way, you won't be alone anymore. I stared at him. He was dead. Had been dead for 84 years. And here he was, offering me the same choice he'd made. I thought about Elizabeth, my wife. She'd died 6 years ago. Cancer. I'd watched her fade, watched her disappear a piece at a time, and I'd never gotten over it. Part of me had come to Point Reyes hoping the isolation would help me forget. Instead, it had just given me more time to remember. If I went down to the ships, would I see her again? Was she out there somewhere, an echo waiting to be called? The whispering got louder. I could hear individual voices now, names being called, promises being made. Come down, join us. You won't be alone anymore. No, I said. Marsh tilted his head. I won't go down there, and I won't turn off the light. Then they'll keep calling, keep getting closer. Eventually, you won't be able to resist. Maybe, but not tonight. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a sad smile, full of regret. You're stronger than I was, he said. But strength won't save you forever. The fog always comes back. The ships always appear. And someday you'll have a moment of weakness. A night when the loneliness is too much. And you'll go down those stairs and out onto the rocks and you'll let them take you. Then I'd better not be here when that happens. He nodded slowly. Then he was gone. Just faded into the air like he'd never been there at all. Maybe he hadn't been. Maybe he was just another echo, another memory projected by the lens. Or maybe I was finally losing my mind. Either way, I had a choice to make. I climbed back up to the quarters and sat down at the desk, pulled out a sheet of paper and started writing. It was a transfer request. Immediate reassignment for medical reasons. I cited stress, isolation, possible hallucinations, all the things that would get me removed from duty and probably end my career. I didn't care. The next morning, I drove to the district headquarters and handed the request to Captain Morrison. He read it without expression, then looked at me. "You saw them," he said. "Yes." "The ships?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, like this was something he'd been expecting. "You're the 5th keeper in 20 years to request emergency transfer from Point Reyes. Every one of them said the same thing. Stress, isolation, hallucinations. And you sent them all away?" "I sent them away because they asked. Because they couldn't handle what they saw. The question is, do you want me to approve this, or do you want to go back out there and finish your assignment?" I stared at him. "You know what's out there. You've always known. I know there's something at Point Reyes that affects people. I know keepers have been seeing things there for 100 years. What those things are, I couldn't tell you. The lighthouse is calling them. The lens is transmitting some kind of signal, and it's making them stronger." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You think you're the first person to figure that out?" In 1912, a keeper removed the lens entirely, packed it in a crate and shipped it to storage. You know what happened? What? The ships kept appearing. The whispering kept happening. The lens didn't matter. What matters is the location. The light just makes it easier to see. Then why keep the lighthouse running? Because it's still a lighthouse. Still a navigational aid. Still saves lives every foggy night when real ships are trying to find their way along the coast. We don't shut down the entire operation just because there's something we don't understand happening in parallel. What about the keepers? The ones who go down to the ships, the ones who disappear? Morrison's expression hardened. That's the job. That's the risk. You sign up to keep the light burning. You accept that some nights will be harder than others. Most keepers do their time and get out. A few don't. That's the way it's always been. I understood then. The Coast Guard knew, had always known. They accepted the losses because the lighthouse served a purpose. The few keepers who went down to the ships were just the cost of doing business. "Approve my transfer," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up a pen and signed the form. "You'll be reassigned to a station in Oregon. Inland post, administrative duties. No more lighthouse work." He handed me the paper. "You lasted 4 months. Longer than most." I took the form and stood up to leave. "Brennan," Morrison said. I turned back. "Don't talk about this. Don't write about it. Don't tell anyone what you saw out there. If you do, they'll bury you. Discredit you. Destroy your career. You understand?" "I understand." I walked out of his office with the transfer papers in my hand. Behind me, I could hear him picking up the phone, already arranging for my replacement. Another keeper who'd see the ships and hear the whispers and have to make the same choice. I served out the rest of my Coast Guard career at a desk in Portland. Pushed paper, filed reports, counted the days until retirement. I never talked about Point Reyes, never told anyone what I'd seen, but I never forgot. In 1972, I read a small article in a Coast Guard newsletter. A keeper at Point Reyes had been found dead at the base of the cliff. No signs of injury consistent with a fall. The official cause of death was listed as accidental. In 1981, another article. Another keeper found dead in the same location. Same circumstances. In 1989, the Coast Guard automated Point Reyes Light Station. Removed the keepers entirely, replaced them with machines. The official reason was budget cuts and efficiency improvements. But I knew the real reason. They'd finally found a way to stop losing people. If nobody was there to hear the whispers, nobody would go down to the ships. The lighthouse is still there, still functioning. The lens still turns, the foghorn still sounds, and the beam still sweeps across the water every night. And on foggy nights, if you stand on the rocks below the light and look out at the water, you can still see them. The ships, the crews, the echoes of everyone who's been called down to the thin place over the past 150 years. They're still waiting. The light is still calling. And someday, someone will answer. I stayed away from Point Reyes for 30 years after my transfer. Told myself I'd never go back. But in 1994, 2 years after my wife's death and a year after my retirement, I found myself driving up that peninsula road again. I told myself I just wanted to see it one more time. Just wanted to remember. The keeper's quarters were empty. No furniture, no personal effects, just bare rooms and dusty windows. The lighthouse itself was closed to the public, accessible only to Coast Guard maintenance crews. But I still had my keys. I climbed down the 294 steps, stood in the lantern room, looked out at the water. It was a clear day. No fog, no ships, just blue sky and blue ocean and the rocks below. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought about going down there, walking out onto the rocks and letting whatever happened happen. Elizabeth was gone. My career was over. I had nothing left but memories. And somewhere out there in the fog, there were others who only existed as memories too. But I didn't go down. I climbed back up the stairs and got in my car and drove away. The light is still calling. I'm just not ready to answer.